Welcome. You're not here by chance. This channel is a place where history finds its voice, and you just close your eyes. Let the night wrap around you like a forgotten story. The history of Freemasonry is like an old attic filled with strange artifacts, mysterious symbols, and forgotten scrolls. All it takes is to crack open the door, and you're already inside a world where every sign holds meaning. Every word might be a cipher, and behind the outer simplicity lies a complex web of meanings, rituals, and philosophical quests. Masons. Even the word itself sounds like a whisper from another time. It conjures images of hidden chambers, flickering candlelight, and people gathered in a circle for an ancient rite. But behind all this mystique lies a surprisingly down-to-earth, almost practical history, a history that began not with philosophers or secrets, but with ordinary, though highly skilled, stonemasons. Yes, it all began with builders. Not in the metaphorical sense, but quite literally. They constructed temples, cathedrals, castles. Their craft was nearly magical. These master builders knew how to coax graceful arches from stubborn stone, how to bring order from a chaos of materials and shape it into a symphony of lines, towers, and vaults. Their knowledge wasn't written down, it was passed from master to apprentice like a treasure. They called themselves simply brothers of the craft. They gathered in guilds, built across Europe, spoke a language of symbols, and guarded their trade secrets fiercely. Construction in those days was almost a sacred act. Every stone, every wall held meaning. A mistake could cost not only a reputation, but a life. So their ranks were closed, reserved for the chosen few, admitted after years of training, trials, and initiation. Their tools, compass, square, and trowel, were more than just instruments of labor. They embodied a philosophy. The compass, tracing a circle, stood for order, perfection, and the pursuit of harmony. The square meant integrity, honesty, a moral guide in life. And the trowel, which joined stones together, reminded them of unity. The importance of cohesion, mutual help, and trust. But everything flows, and even the strongest walls eventually begin to crack. With the arrival of the Renaissance and the decline of ecclesiastical dominance, the old craft guilds began to change. Building no longer seemed a mystery. Knowledge was becoming more accessible. And so, the guilds began to open their doors to new kinds of people, not stonemasons, but philosophers, mathematicians, doctors, alchemists. People whose craft was invisible, yet no less profound. They didn't wield trowels, but in their minds, they shaped structures just as solid logics, theories, systems of ethics. They cared about the same ideals as the old builders: order, integrity, perfection. Only now, the cathedrals they built were not made of stone, but of ideas. Thus was born the new Freemasonry, a secret intellectual brotherhood where ancient symbols were preserved but imbued with philosophical depth. The compass no longer just drew the outlines of buildings, it traced the boundaries of human behavior. The square no longer measured walls, but deeds. And the trowel bonded not stones, but people united by the pursuit of inner growth. This new form of masonry found its greatest flourishing in Scotland. It was there, in the quiet halls of Edinburgh, that lodges gathered where descendants of builders now sat side by side with scholars, dreamers, and noblemen. They discussed the works of ancient philosophers, alchemical treatises, spoke of virtue, justice, the meaning of life. Their evenings resembled theatrical rituals, candles, cryptic, symbols, solemn speeches, and rites of initiation. It was no longer just a craft. It had become something more, a path. Spiritual, philosophical, demanding. And it was in this atmosphere that the traditions were born which Masons still uphold today. Rituals, moral codes, and the aspiration toward inner perfection. But the most pivotal moment in the Brotherhood's history came in the 18th century in London. On June 24th, 1717, the feast day of St. John, the Baptist representatives of 4 lodges met in a tavern with the curious name, the Goose and Gridiron. There, they decided to unite. Thus emerged the Grand Lodge of London, the first official organization from which modern Freemasonry begins. From that moment on, Freemasonry ceased to be something closed off for the few. It became an influential philosophical movement, uniting people around the world. And yet, despite all the changes, at the very heart of the Brotherhood still lives the spirit of those ancient craftsmen who once, high beneath the arches of half-built cathedrals, drew perfect circles on smooth stone with a steady compass. At the beginning of the 18th century, Masonic lodges were fairly scattered gatherings. These were small communities, usually unconnected to each other, where people passionate about philosophy, moral self-improvement, and the idea of brotherhood met. They gathered in taverns, exchanging thoughts about goodness, truth, and the meaning of human life. But everything changed in 1717. 4 London lodges, the Goose and Gridiron, the Crown, the Apple Tree, and the Cup and Grapes, decided to do what no one had dared before. They united and created a single organization with shared traditions, rituals, and rules. This decision was not spontaneous. It had been brewing for a long time. The people gathered on that June day understood that for Freemasonry to become influential, it needed order, authority, and structure. Thus was born the Grand Lodge of London, first centralized Masonic organization. Its first Grand Master was Anthony Sayer. He was neither a celebrity nor a courtier, held no high office, but enjoyed respect among the brethren. He was entrusted with leadership, known to be a modest but reliable figure capable of laying a solid foundation. However, soon everything changed. In 1721, John Montagu, a duke and courtier with a famous name, became Grand Master. His arrival meant Freemasonry had stepped beyond a narrow circle. It became fashionable. Aristocrats, scholars, and philosophers, the intellectual elite of Britain, began joining the lodges. Freemasonry was becoming not just a club of shared interests, but an influential social force. One of the main tasks of the new Grand Lodge was to create a clear system. It was decided to introduce 3 degrees: apprentice, fellowcraft, and master. Each degree had its own ritual, filled with symbols, philosophical allusions, and moral lessons. This was not mere formality. The initiation was meant to awaken, in a person, the desire for growth, for the search for meaning and truth. Moreover, the Grand Lodge was the first to codify rules in writing. Thus appeared the Constitution of the Freemasons, written in 1723 by James Anderson, a Scottish pastor and distinguished Mason. His work became a true milestone. It defined how a lodge should live, which principles to uphold, and how to treat one another. This document quickly spread across Europe and became the foundation for future Masonic organizations worldwide. Freemasonry rapidly gained authority. It attracted brilliant minds and people of the arts, philosophers, and diplomats. Within the lodge, they could discuss enlightenment ideas without fear of judgment. Ideas of humanism, equality, and spiritual freedom all resonated with the spirit of the era. Freemasonry became a space where one could speak honestly and think freely. From England, this movement spread to France, Germany, the Netherlands, and eventually to North America. Lodges appeared wherever enlightened minds traveled. Freemasonry became not just a philosophical movement, but part of the cultural and political fabric of entire nations. At the very core of this entire system always stood initiation, the rite of passage. It was not simply a ceremony. It was a whole path, a spiritual journey. It unfolded in 3 stages, each with its own purpose and symbolism. The first stage was the apprentice degree. The candidate was brought into the lodge blindfolded, with a bare chest, symbolizing ignorance, openness, and readiness for change. He was asked, is he ready to follow the moral laws of the brotherhood? Ready to keep secrets, to learn, and to become better? After a solemn oath, taken with a hand on the Bible, the blindfold was removed and a new world opened before him. A world of light, symbolic awakening. Once the senior brethren were convinced of his seriousness, the next stage followed, the fellowcraft degree. Here the inner work began. The candidate went through a symbolic path, faced obstacles, had to reflect and answer questions about duty, morality, and the meaning of life. He learned to understand symbols and to seek truth not on the surface, but deep within. Only those who passed these stages with honor could become masters. And this third degree was the richest and most mystical. The initiation turned into a ritual drama in which the legend of Master Hiram, the builder of Solomon's temple, was enacted. He was killed for refusing to reveal the secrets of his craft. The candidate experienced this symbolically. He was killed and laid on the floor, representing the death of the old self. But then he was raised by a special sign known only to the initiated. It was a rebirth. He rose as a new man, spiritually mature, awakened, ready to carry knowledge to others. Afterwards, the master was taught the essence of the trials. Death was only an allegory. True immortality lay in the development of the spirit, in loyalty to duty, in service to truth. With this understanding, the candidate received signs of distinction and advanced to a new quality, not just a brother, but a mentor, an example for others. Masonic symbols often become objects of myths, assumptions, and conspiracy theories. They are confused with religious images or legends about secret control over humanity. However, behind the many symbols, instead of supposed secrets and conspiracies, there usually lie philosophical ideas reflecting a striving for moral reflection, a search for order in the world, an inner discipline. These signs are less about power and more about an attempt to build a personal system of values within a complex reality. Among the many symbols used by Freemasons, one particularly often sparks controversy and gossip: the all-seeing eye. Its image, an eye inside a triangle, surrounded by radiant light, appears in a variety of contexts, from church paintings to banknotes. For some, it is a symbol of something mysterious, almost sinister. For others, a reminder of an unseen watcher. But the roots of this image run much deeper. A similar symbol existed already in ancient Egypt. The eye of Horus represented divine protection and supreme wisdom. Later, in Christian tradition, the eye within a triangle became a sign of the all-seeing God who observes human deeds. The Freemasons adopted precisely this version, not as a symbol of fear, but as a constant reminder. Actions cannot be hidden, and responsibility cannot be passed off. The Eye of Providence in the Lodge Hall is not mere decoration, but a sign of inner accountability. Next to this symbol, one often sees a checkerboard floor, alternating black and white squares. It has nothing to do with a game. Its meaning lies in contrast, in the constant alternation of light and darkness, good and evil. For a Mason, it is a metaphor for life, where every step is a choice. The rituals performed on such a floor emphasize that knowledge frees one from the necessity of making decisions and answering for them. Two pillars, called Boaz and Yakin, hold great significance as well. According to Old Testament tradition, they are associated with Solomon's first temple in Jerusalem. The Freemasons endowed them with additional meaning. One pillar symbolizes physical strength, the readiness to endure life's blows. The other, the aspiration toward spiritual growth and understanding. Together, they remind us that a person is whole only when reason and will are inseparable. The pyramid with the eye, the very symbol that even appears on the US dollar bill, today is firmly associated with Freemasonry, although its creation involved not only members of the fraternity. Still, the idea behind it resonates. The pyramid is an allegory of a path. At its base lies the earthly, the material. The higher you ascend, the less bustle there is, the closer you come to the search for meaning. At the top, the eye as the point of culmination, not as a reward, but as a state of being, a person capable of seeing the world not through the eyes of the body, but through mind and spirit. But it is precisely such symbols and images that have generated many rumors. What is a metaphor for self-knowledge? To initiates often becomes a dark mystery to outsiders. Closed meetings, special rites, silence about the inner workings of lodges. All this seemed suspicious to society. And in the absence of information, imagination did its work. The first rumors about the dark side of Freemasonry began to appear as early as the 5th–10th century. By the 18th century, suspicions turned into official accusations. In 1738, Pope Clement XII issued a papal bull condemning Masonic meetings as heretical. The fraternity was outlawed, accused of allegedly disrupting established order and posing a threat to traditional values. These statements gave rise to a wave of suspicion. Freemasons were accused of witchcraft, occult connections, and subversive activities. All this was fueled by fear of a secret society where rituals and symbols were obscure and not publicly explained. The more silence there was, the more myths grew. These myths flourished especially in the 19th century, amid a vogue for mysticism and secret teachings. It was then that the idea of Freemasonry's alleged satanic nature took root in popular consciousness. Yet in reality, most of these fantasies were not based on facts, but on fears projected onto what was not understood. At the end of the 19th century in France, a man appeared who played an unexpectedly large role in shaping the image of Freemasonry as a dark force. His name was Leo Taxil. He was a writer, journalist, and a very shrewd provocateur. In the 1880s, Taxil began publishing books and articles, confidently asserting that Masonic lodges were not mere social clubs, but secret societies worshiping Lucifer. He described supposed secret rituals in detail, told of conspiracies against the church and society, and did so with such zeal that the public not only believed but was enthralled. These stories quickly spread worldwide, were translated into dozens of languages, and Taxil himself became almost a celebrity. However, several years later, he stepped before journalists and admitted that it was all fabricated, a huge hoax, devised with one purpose: to mock the Catholic Church, which, in Taxil's view, was too credulous and obsessed with finding enemies. But the damage was done. His confession could not erase from public memory what had already been absorbed. The myths about Freemasonry's satanic nature continued to live on, fueled by fear, rumors, and new fantasies. A peculiar fuel for these legends also came from other sources. In the second half of the 19th century, occult organizations arose, such as the Hermetic Order of the Golden Dawn in England. This group indeed engaged in esoteric practices and mystical rituals, occasionally borrowing Masonic symbolism. Though they were not directly connected to Freemasonry, in the eyes of the wider public, the line between them blurred. Masonic imagery began to be associated with magic, alchemy, and all that is usually hidden in the shadows. The situation became even more complicated in the 20th century. A special role was played by the so-called Protocols of the Elders of Zion, a forged document in which Freemasons were portrayed as part of a global conspiracy. This text was used as propaganda and gave rise to an entire layer of conspiracy theories, in which Freemasons appeared as secret puppeteers controlling governments, finances, and the destinies of nations. In Nazi Germany, myths about Freemasons were not mere rumors, they became political weapons. Freemasons were persecuted, accused of undermining societal foundations, conspiring against the state, and engaging in subversive activities. Such accusations often arose not because of actual deeds, but because of the very nature of the fraternity. Secrecy, rituals, a special language, all of which seemed dangerous to regimes striving for total control. The myth that Freemasons worshiped darkness was formed not on facts, but on a mixture of ignorance, fear, religious hostility, and deliberate fabrications. Even exposes and historical criticism could not fully dispel it. It continues to live on, fueling imaginations, stirring anxiety, and simultaneously intensifying interest in Freemasonry itself. From the very first decades of its existence, the fraternity attracted not only those seeking personal development, but also those striving to change the world. Freemasons often became participants in key political processes, not because they organized conspiracies, but because ideas of liberty, equality, and fraternity organically fit the ideals of the Enlightenment era. A vivid example is the involvement of Freemasons in the American Revolution. Many of the founding fathers of the United States were members of lodges. George Washington, the country's first president, openly demonstrated his connection to the fraternity. On the day the first stone was laid for the foundation of the Capitol, in 1793, he appeared in Masonic regalia, spoke the ritual words, and took part in a ceremony that emphasized not only the birth of a new capital, but also a new society. Benjamin Franklin was also a Mason. He not only helped draft the Declaration of Independence and the Constitution, but also leveraged his connections in European lodges. Thanks to these contacts, Franklin secured aid from France, weapons, fleet, money. In the Masonic Lodge, Les Neuf Sœurs, the Nine Sisters in Paris, he was received with honors rarely accorded even to monarchs. The French Revolution was also influenced by the fraternity. Among its key figures were the Count of Mirabeau Danton and the Marquis de Lafayette, all of whom were connected to Masonic lodges at various times. These lodges served as a kind of free platform, or representatives of different estates could discuss change without fear. It is no coincidence that the Revolution's slogan, liberty, equality, fraternity, resonated so closely with Masonic ideals. Latin America offers yet another important example. Simon Bolivar, the legendary liberator of the continent, was initiated into Freemasonry in London in 1803. Through the Masonic network, he established contacts with revolutionaries in different countries, united their efforts, and secured support. Lodges in Latin America became real centers for planning uprisings against Spanish rule. Thanks to these connections, Bolivar was able to create a broad coalition and liberate Venezuela, Colombia, Ecuador, Peru, and Bolivia. A similar story unfolded in Italy. Giuseppe Garibaldi, a national hero and leader of the unification movement, was a Mason and never hid it. In 1864, he became the Grand Master of the East of Italy, a high rank in the Masonic hierarchy. He used the fraternity's symbolism, rituals, and ideas to unite his troops and inspire them, ultimately creating a unified Italy. Even in the United Kingdom, despite a more stable political system, Freemasons did not remain on the sidelines. Winston Churchill, the future Prime Minister, was initiated into Freemasonry in 1901. Although he did not show notable activity in the fraternity, his membership itself speaks volumes. Freemasonry had influence, and its principles found resonance. Among the intellectual and political elite in the 19th century, British Freemasons were actively involved in public life. They did not hide in the shadows, as conspiracy theorists claim. On the contrary, they built schools, opened shelters, and helped the poor. Their lodges became places where ideas of enlightenment, humanism, and fraternity were discussed. These were not conspirators, but people striving to make the world a little better. Freemasons played an important role in many historical events, in the American Revolution, in the fight for independence in Latin America, and in the unification of Italy. Their influence was felt everywhere, not as secret rulers, but through ideas that inspired entire generations. Yet probably no other society has been surrounded by as many myths. In various parts of the world, they were accused of being the puppet, masters of global politics. The first major suspicions appeared after the French Revolution. People wanted a simple explanation for the changes, and soon a book by Augustin Barruel appeared. It claimed that Freemasons, Enlightenment thinkers, and Jacobin conspired to deliberately destroy the old order. The book became popular and in the public imagination. Freemasons became almost the sorcerers of change. At the end of the 19th century, a certain Leo Taxil went even further. He invented an entire system, the mysterious Palladium order, allegedly worshipping Lucifer. His stories were printed in thousands of copies, and even the Vatican believed him. Only later did Taxil admit that it was all a hoax. But the damage was done, and the idea of Satan-worshipping Freemasons took root in popular consciousness. That no less harmful was another forgery, the Protocols of the Elders of Zion. This document, forged in the early 20th century, combined anti-Semitic and anti-Masonic myths into one world evil. Even after it was proven a forgery in 1921, the idea persisted, fueling the darkest sides of propaganda, including Nazi propaganda. However, all this mysticism sharply contrasts with reality. Masonic lodges have always been independent from each other. They had no single leader, no central headquarters coordinating world politics. Moreover, Freemasons often argued among themselves and found themselves in opposition. So much for a world government. The role of Freemasons in revolutions is also exaggerated. Yes, many revolutionaries were Masons, but lodges were never centers for planning coups. They were rather spaces where new ideas were discussed. Masonic revolutionaries coexisted alongside conservative Masons, sometimes even on opposite sides of the barricades. This was the case in France, for example. Some advocated for a constitutional monarchy, others for its complete overthrow. Why did myths about Freemasons become so popular? The answer is simple. It is always easier for people to explain complex phenomena through the image of a mysterious power and to admit that history often moves chaotically, without a plan or puppet masters. Freemasons, with their secrecy, symbols, and rituals, fit perfectly the role of secret rulers. Freemasonry in Russia developed differently. It did not become a hotbed of revolutions or create shadow governments. On the contrary, Russian Freemasons were closely connected with the cultural and Enlightenment elite. Some served at court and even enjoyed the personal trust of emperors. Lodges flourished, especially during the reign of Catherine the Great, although she herself was cautious about them. Among her close circle was Prince Alexander Golitsyn, one of the most influential Freemasons of his time. Masonic lodges in Russia gathered the most educated and enlightened people. One of the most famous was the Three Stars Lodge in St. Petersburg. Its members included figures such as Nikolai Novikov, writer Alexander Radishev, and Senator Ivan Alagin. These people established libraries and printing houses, published philosophical works, and spread ideas of enlightenment and public good. A particularly vivid example was Novikov himself, a publisher, publicist, and educator. His efforts made the works of French philosophers accessible to Russian society. Under Catherine the Great, he felt relatively free, but everything changed. Under Paul I, the emperor was suspicious of all secret societies, and in 1798 banned the activities of all lodges. The ban was strict. People were stripped of their ranks, exiled, and printing houses were closed. Freemasonry went underground. After Paul I's death and the accession of Alexander I, a brief revival began. The new emperor regarded the lodges with cautious trust. Freemasonry regained influence, especially in the cultural sphere. Among its supporters was the historian Karamzin. His work, History of the Russian State, absorbed Masonic ideas of morality and humanism. Although Alexander Pushkin was not formally a Mason, he was surrounded by people belonging to lodges. Their views influenced him, which is evident in Eugene Onegin and Boris Godunov in their reflections on freedom, morality, and fate. Another outstanding figure was Alexander Labzin, philosopher and publisher. His journal, The Sign Herald, became the center of intellectual life in the early 19th century. Through it spread ideas of moral improvement, self-development, and service to society. But after the Decembrist uprising, many of whom were also Masons, the authorities cracked down on the lodges again. Nicholas I introduced repressions, and Freemasonry in Russia once more became outlawed. For many years, it existed only underground, losing its influence. At the beginning of the 20th century, in Russia, a movement arose again whose breath seemed long extinguished: Freemasonry. After the turbulent events of the 1905 revolution, when a restless hope for change hung in the air, intellectual circles once again began to speak of reviving the brotherhood. Lodges began to appear in St. Petersburg, Moscow, and major cities of the Russian Empire, not loudly or boldly, but with the quiet persistence that always characterized secret societies driven by an idea. However, their influence could no longer compare to previous eras. Russia was changing rapidly, and the aristocratic salon world was giving way to the age of mass movements and new ideologies. The October Revolution of 1917 became the final point. The Bolshevik government, intolerant of any competition in the realm of ideas, immediately declared Masonic organizations illegal. They were labeled bourgeois, hostile, and alien to the spirit of the New World. And so began a new journey. Masons emigrated. The lodges, as before, did not disappear, but turned into societies in exile. Paris, Berlin, and Prague became new havens. Here, far from their homeland, Russian Masons tried to preserve not only rituals and symbols, but also the inner light, that which nourished their reflections on humanity, freedom, and the moral path. Among them were such outstanding minds as Nikolai Berdyaev, a philosopher for whom freedom was not an abstract slogan, but the essence of existence. But exile is not just a change of place. It is also the loss of the breath of an era. Gradually, Masonic lodges in exile began to fade, losing connection with the living cultural body of Russia. Throughout the 20th century, Freemasonry was banned in the Soviet Union. Its name could not be spoken aloud. It became part of a shadowy memory, one of those bourgeois myths that existed only in whispers, half-spoken stories, and innuendo. Only with the arrival of perestroika, when ideological walls collapsed, did Freemasonry raise its head again. But this was already a different era, and the lodges that appeared in the new Russia took on a different face. Without former influence, without wide public resonance, in a new political and spiritual atmosphere. Nevertheless, despite all the prophecies of its decline, Freemasonry did not disappear. Today, it lives on. Perhaps not so visibly, not in the same form as before, but it continues to exist as a special form of spiritual and social life. Worldwide, there are about 6 million Masons. More than 2 million live in the United States, a country where Freemasonry has become almost an open public institution. Here, lodges hold events, offer tours of their buildings, publish membership lists, and actively participate in charity. This is Freemasonry without the fog of secrecy. Freemasonry as part of the social fabric. In the United Kingdom, there are about 200,000 Masons. Here, too, lodges operate transparently, actively participate in public life, fund historical projects, and openly declare themselves. In France, about 150,000. In Germany, around 100,000. In these countries, Freemasonry has long been part of cultural tradition. It continues to attract new members, especially those seeking not political power, but spiritual support. Creative people, philosophers, scientists, and those searching for answers. In Eastern Europe, where Freemasonry was suppressed for many decades under socialism, the movement is slowly recovering. It has not yet become widespread, but already operates quietly, calmly, on new foundations. What does modern Freemasonry represent? First of all, it is a community of people striving for moral and spiritual growth. Here, discussions are not about strategies and conspiracies, but philosophical, moral, and cultural questions. The idea of enlightenment still sounds here, not in a political, but a deeply personal sense. People come to the lodge not to gain power, but to find meaning. Yes, they still conduct rituals. Yes, the symbols remain: columns, compass, and square. But the main focus of modern lodges has become charity. In the US and UK, tens of millions of dollars are donated annually to medical research, children's hospitals, educational programs, and support for the needy. Masonic hospitals in some countries are considered among the best, not because of luxury, but because of the spirit of service. Education and culture are another important direction. Masons create scholarships, support students, and finance the restoration of architectural monuments. There is no showy luxury here, only duty and a sense of responsibility to time. As for politics, 21st century Freemasonry has decisively distanced itself from political struggle. In most lodges, discussion of political and religious topics is prohibited. This is not fear, but a philosophical position. Freemasonry seeks internal unity and therefore avoids anything that could sow division. Its influence on political processes today is minimal compared to past times, and perhaps this is its new strength. Nevertheless, myths live on. Freemasonry is still surrounded by speculation, suspicion, and conspiracy theories. This is the very shadow that follows the light. But 21st century Masons try to be open. They publish information about themselves, organize lectures, and explain their essence. Their goal remains not power, but moral improvement, dialogue, and helping others. Paradoxically, Freemasonry has become part of mass culture as a symbol, an archetype, a mystery. Books, movies, video games, all refer to the image of the secret brotherhood. The greatest resonance came after Dan Brown's The Da Vinci Code. Although the book mainly deals with the mysteries of Catholicism, millions of readers first learned about Masons through it as keepers of ancient knowledge. In The Lost Symbol, Brown directly addresses Freemasonry. His hero passes through signs, symbols, and allegories as if through a labyrinth of meanings leading to the greatest mystery, the human being. Movies like National Treasure continue this tradition. In them, Masons are not gloomy conspirators, but bearers of cultural memory, keys to history, images of what is forgotten. Even in video games like Assassin's Creed, Masonic imagery intertwines with ideas of freedom, secret knowledge, and resistance to tyranny. Yes, all this is fiction, but it awakens interest. It makes people think. It brings them back to books, history, and philosophy. Perhaps not always accurately, but partly through this path, Freemasonry has once again become part of society's dialogue. Freemasonry today is not a relic or a museum. It is a quiet but living tradition. It is a search for meaning. It is a brotherhood where questions are more important than answers. It demands no faith, only a striving for truth.